See, I like you, but I just don't trust you.
That's okay.
I would invite you. I'd invite you to New York.
I don't trust you either.
You could come party with me. We'd hang out, but I just don't.
Yeah, that's totally
If I
okay.
invite you back to my place, you'd probably steal all my things.
Money, passport.
You'd find 10 euros lying around, and then there wouldn't be 10 euros anymore.
Yeah. Exactly.
You shouldn't steal my passport though. It doesn't look like you.
Doesn't matter.
Yeah, you just sell it.
Yeah.
U.S. passport, very valuable.
Yeah.
Nothing serious between us. Promise?
Okay. Yeah. Promise.
Oh shit, really? Are you adventurous and spontaneous? So I've been doing this thing called game for about 20 years. I know that sounds like a long time. It is. It's a really, really long time to have been doing this. And in that time, I've seen a lot of different styles of game kind of come and go. Funny enough, the thing that's the most popular as far as style of game right now, I don't even think is by any means the most effective. But what I want to do right now is I want to look at some of those different styles and look at what was really good about some of them, what really worked, and then some of the drawbacks and what you can take and implement in your game and what you really shouldn't. And I want to end off by talking about what I think the optimal style of game is, what kind of perfect game, quote unquote, should look like, what the most advanced, incorporating the best elements of all that game should look like. And when I do this, I'm going to rate the games on two kind of metrics. The first is what I call best possible result. So when everything goes your way, if that style of game works to maximum effectiveness, what is the best result you can get? Because there are some styles of game that even if they work, they're probably not going to get you the highest caliber of girl because they're just not designed for that. Whereas there are some styles where when it works, you really could get a 10 out of 10. Then the other thing is consistency, right? Because just getting a 10 out of 10 one set in like 500 is not really a great game style. You want to be more consistent than that. And funny enough, a lot of the game styles that are really kind of have that maximum power very high tend to lose out in terms of consistency. So let's crack into it. Let's look at some of these game styles in terms of these two metrics, and let's let the discussion begin. All right, so I'm gonna draw a graph. And again, as I mentioned, we have the two axes. First is what we'll call best possible result. I promise I'm literate. And then the other one would be likelihood of that result. Okay, so you have likelihood of the result and the best possible result you could get. So let's start off with we'll start off with the old school 2002 to 2005 or 6 sort of can style of the game. If you've read the book The Game, this would be the style that they're really outlining in that book. And I want to look at these in terms of early game and late game. So basically opening and getting the girl's attention, and then actually closing, getting a result, getting to sex or a girlfriend or a relationship, whatever that end result is. So in terms of good results and likelihood of good results, can game was really good at opening. And it makes sense that it would be very, very popular early on because that was everybody's focus. How do you open? How do you talk to a girl? How do you get an interaction started? So in terms of good result and likelihood, it would be up here. Now, why do I give it a really high good result rating? Specifically because it's really good for dealing with groups, which is where you find the hottest girls, and because it's really good at triggering a lot of attraction. So when it does work, when you get a girl into you, she gets very, very into you. The attraction level is very, very high. So it's very powerful in that regard. However, it is pretty inconsistent when you get to later game for a few reasons. So if we look at late game, a lot of guys really didn't have the results come through very, very well. And why is that? Why is it that this can game didn't work for late game? There are a number of different reasons. One of the big ones is congruence. So most guys, when they were doing can game, they're doing scripted game based on other people's routines. So guy A created a routine, put it on the internet. Guy B uses it even though he has a completely different personality than guy A. Also, guy B is using a routine from guy A, guy C, guy H, and guy F. These are 4 routines that even aren't consistent within themselves. You're conveying different traits from different people. It's very all over the place, and just the longer the girl spends with you, she starts to realize there's something a little off, there's something a little incongruent going on. Second thing was, because it was so effective and got such big results early on, what would tend to happen is that it was hard to sustain, because you have this girl in this really hyped up, emotional, like reactive state. But then if you drop off at any point, it gets boring, and she starts to realize it's not what it was, right? Girls don't tend to notice how good the interaction is right now. They notice how good it is compared to how it was before. So if interaction started off amazing and now is good, that feels like a negative, it feels like a drop off. Whereas it started off as mediocre and gets to good, it feels like a positive reaction because it's increasing. So the problem with the can game was that it was actually almost too good up front and pumped too many emotions, and it made it very hard to sustain. So there was a huge drop off later on. The other thing that would happen was that guys would just run out of routines. Right? They had X number of routines, and if the interaction took beyond a certain number of hours, they're starting to really scrape the bottom of the barrel in terms of what they can say. So all of those are definitely reasons why it wouldn't work. The final reason it wouldn't work is that because it was so formulaic, and the longer you go in the interaction, the more possibilities are going to come up, the less likely it is that your strict, rigid formula is exactly the right thing for that possibility. So the inflexibility led to a lot of inconsistency. So what you'd see is a lot of really good early results, a lot of good opens, even good up to the point of getting phone numbers. But as far as like following up with those numbers, taking girls home, building relationships, it really, really fell short. And even some of the best guys, they'd have situations where they'd do well on the first day, and then you just can't keep up material for an entire relationship of days, weeks, months, years. And the guys would have trouble even keeping girls around after starting a relationship with them. So anyway, that's a lot to do with can game. The other thing that a lot of guys had an issue with can game, not an effectiveness thing, but an emotional thing, and why guys didn't want to do it, was it felt inauthentic. It felt like you were being someone else. It felt like you weren't being yourself, doing your real personality. And to be fair, the girl probably thought you were being inauthentic at some point too. And so it wasn't really giving guys a lot of confidence in themselves. They had confidence in the game, confidence in the routines, but they really weren't developing core confidence, and they didn't feel they were growing as men. And so that was kind of an emotional issue that kind of made people kind of shy away from it as well. There were also some political things that happened after the book, The Game, that had nothing to do with effectiveness. A lot of the switch from the can game to the natural style game, that is what we're going to talk about next, a lot of that switch actually was political in nature and in reaction to the book, The Game, and some of the stereotypes that were coming out of that. But that's neither here nor there. Let's get to the next style of game, which is the natural style of game, which you guys may be familiar with. You may have heard of it. The natural style of game basically is the idea that what the girl's responding to isn't so much what you say and do as it is how you're feeling and what kind of emotions you're putting out into the interaction. And the thing with this is that it doesn't really give you a lot of specific guidance, especially early on in the interaction. You don't know specifically what to say and what to do, whereas you would have with the can game. And so your results early on are going to be wildly inconsistent and also less likely to be optimized because you're trying to reinvent the wheel every single interaction. You're trying to come up with something new and brilliant every single time you talk to a girl instead of relying on something that's worked 10 times before and has a likelihood of working. So for that reason, I'd say early on, your best possible results are not that great, and your consistency is also not that great. So maybe you're like here to begin with this sort of quote unquote natural style of game. It's really poor in terms of the opening, and this is why a lot of guys nowadays feel like game is a numbers game. I mean, that's one of the most common things you hear, oh, it's just a numbers game. You just have to do enough approaches, just talk to more girls. Why? Because you're getting so many kind of mediocre to poor opens, you're so inconsistent that you're really just throwing your game at a lot of girls until you find that one that happens to like it, that one that is down, so to speak. However, the good thing about that is that because you've weeded out so many girls early on, and because what you're going with is fairly congruent to your own personality, the small segment of girls that are going to respond well to you, they will be relatively more likely to continue through to an overall positive result. So I would give the likelihood of a positive result, it actually kind of goes up over time as you go to early and late game. And so what happens with that switch from sort of can game to natural game is that the quality of girl getting approached and talked to and dated actually went down within the community of guys going out and meeting girls on cold approach. So the caliber went down, but the consistency did go up because, again, that carry-through consistency with can game was very poor, whereas the consistency with natural game is a lot higher. Also with natural game, it is a lot more congruent to escalate. Right? So when you are just being yourself, and yourself is horny and likes a girl, it makes sense for you to get physical. Whereas when you're pushing a girl away and saying, hey, hands off the merchandise, we're not going to get along, and then you try and get physical, it's very incongruent. So the carry through and consistency was a lot better with natural game, but it did become way more of a numbers game up front, and the caliber of girl has really diminished from what I've seen over the past 10 years, which is really like kind of weird and sad to see that, you know, the technology is improving, so to speak, and yet the results, and especially the results of, you know, the quality of girl has really gone down community-wide, in my opinion, from what I've seen. So that's not really what I got into the game for. I didn't get into the game for mediocre girls and that sort of a thing. So both of these have really good selling points and really bad drawbacks, right? The really great selling point of can game is that consistency and the fact that you can really, really be on and you can really have the optimal thing to say. So that's really useful. The positive of the natural game is that it makes you feel authentic, so it feels better and more fun to do, right? And then the other thing is that when you do have a girl that's into you, your consistency of follow through and getting a result is gonna be higher. So the back end frustration factors, not as high, and like the consistency with which you can get with some kind of girl is higher, but then again, the quality tends to be a bit lower. So is there a way to get the best of both worlds? Is there a way to do the best of both? Well, I would contend that there is, and this is the outline I will give for it. So what I suggest is that some of your game should be canned. Some of your game, to an extent, should be canned. You should have responses for common situations. However, these responses should be responses that you have used before personally and have worked for you, or ideally responses that you came up with yourself. That way they are completely congruent with your personality, right? Even the most natural guys in the real world do repeat stories, do say the same things over and over. Comedians do it, salespeople do it, guys who are good socially do it across the board. It's totally fine and congruent to do, especially if it's coming from yourself, okay? So yes, you should have some canned stuff to rely on, but ideally it is congruent with you. And more to the point, rather than just have canned lines, like this is this one specific sentence I say, or this is one specific story I say, what you should have is canned formats. So for example, when you get a shit test, you know that there are a few ways to pass it. One is misinterpret it as a compliment. Another one is agree and exaggerate. Another one is to be aloof and unaffected by it and kind of change the subject, which can work in some cases, right? So there's these different formats that you can use, even if you're not using the same exact lines every single time. And if you get good at the formats, you're gonna come up with things that on average or in general are gonna be good very, very consistently. Okay, so it's somewhat canned, but it's not entirely canned. And again, the candidness of it should come from you, from what you've done in the past and felt comfortable with and had work for you, and then ideally from your own life, your own stories, and things that you have created yourself, all right? And then beyond that, because you are developing an actual skill instead of lines, you're gonna develop more confidence, you're gonna develop more of a belief that you yourself are a high value guy. Also, because you've come up with these lines, when you're faced with an unfamiliar situation, you're gonna tend to do better in that situation than you would have with, for example, can game, and also better than you would have with natural game, right? You're gonna do better than you would have with can game because instead of having to go rewrite a line for it or use a line that's not like well calibrated to the situation, you're gonna be able to come up with something, you know, of the right formula in that moment. You're gonna do better than natural game guys because yeah, they'll come up with something, but none of their stuff was really high quality or particularly tight in terms of like the structure and framework. So it really is going to be the best of both worlds in terms of all that. And ideally what they should do, having these things to fall back on when needed, especially at critical moments in the interaction, gives you the freedom and confidence to truly be yourself and express yourself, actually maybe more authentically even than a guy who's doing natural game, because you can be confident of a good result, so you actually can express yourself with even more freedom. All right, so, but in terms of effectiveness, what would this look like? Well, on the initial interaction, you have some canned lines to use. You've used them before, they work. And even if something comes up, you're going to have a good solution to it. Also, your canned lines are going to be congruent with you. So I would say that your metric in terms of best possible outcome and likelihood are at least as good as they would be with the canned game, probably a bit better. That's maybe even being ungenerous to it, but certainly it would be above that level. And then as you go forward, and as girl already likes you, things are progressing nicely, and you're being put in familiar situations, well, you're going to be more confident and more comfortable in those situations than either a canned game guy or a natural game guy would be. So it's going to let you set yourself apart even more so. And the situation itself is just going to be easier and easier than the open. So if anything, your effectiveness should go up slightly. It's already pretty high, so I don't think it's going to go up a ton. But as you can see, your effectiveness in terms of getting a good solid interaction is going to be as high or higher than it was with the can game, and then your ability to follow it through is going to be dramatically better, because essentially you are being yourself in the same way that a natural game guy would be, and so that congruence is there, that ability to escalate in an organic way is there, and your skill set doesn't diminish over time. It's not like you run out of routines or run out of things to say, because a big part of it is you understand the format and are making these things up on the spot. Now, obviously, this does require you to develop a skill set. It does require you to learn these formats and practice these formats and get good with them, but that's a lot easier than you might think, because there are only a few formats, and the same things do come up over and over and over again. And this specifically is exactly what I do in my own game. And to be fair, even during the can game era, I was already starting to come up with my own stuff, because quite frankly, I was teaching among a lot of guys who were saying the same things, and we just couldn't simply be saying the same thing. So I kind of got a natural start in developing my own material and my own routines, and I noticed that my consistency and effectiveness went up once I started doing this. So how do you actually learn this optimized style of game? Well, it really comes down to getting grips on the verbals of what's going on, understanding what words are optimal for a game, what words are not optimal, understanding the formats you're using, and getting practice with them to the point that they become natural, right? To the point that when a girl puts you in, like gives you a frame control test or a shit test, something like that, your natural response is not to supplicate and give in. And your natural response is not to get flustered, but your natural response is to understand that it is a positive. Your natural response is to have 5 or 10 formats that you can use off the top of your head so that you can come up with something on the spot that's going to pass that shit test congruently, well, and in the moment. Right? And what is that? That's the verbal game skill set. That's literally learning and practicing your verbals. And it's actually practicing your verbals to a higher level even than the can game guys would. Right? The skill that the people doing can game had was of scripting out of field. Right? The skill I want you to learn is understand the formats and the patterns in the field and practice them to the point of habit. And again, this sounds potentially daunting, but it's actually quite easy because there are not that many patterns. And once you've mastered a few of them, you're going to just find them occurring over and over and over again, right? So I really suggest that you focus on the verbal elements of your game and focus on not just the words, but the structures and patterns of the words, right? And what's that going to do for you? Well, you're going to be more consistent. You're going to have things to rely on. So you're going to have that confidence that any situation you're put in, you have things to say. But also beyond that, that even if you don't have things to say, you can come up with things on the spot. The things you're going to say are going to be congruent with you. They're going to be a reflection of your own personality. And you're also going to be able to continue those good early results all the way through your set because you are actually being yourself. You're not just like repeating some canned stuff, you're actually becoming game, so to speak, right? You are learning rather than memorizing, right? That's actually a really key idea in any kind of learning is, are you just memorizing some stuff or are you actually learning and you know, making it your own? That's what I'm encouraging you to do with this verbal game, okay? So big takeaways, it's okay to have canned game. Big takeaways, you want your canned game to be congruent, and then you want to make sure that you're considering all of the elements of game from the start all the way through the end. And you want to have a plan not just for the open, but a plan all the way throughout, but a plan that is flexible because you're using formats rather than rigid lines. Again, that's what I've done in my game. That's what's gotten me success and made me continue to have greater and greater success every single year, even as different eras have occurred in terms of game, even as different ideas have come up in game, my results have gotten consistently better and better and better. And that's what I want to see for you as well. So if you like this video, leave a like. Also, if you have a question or comment, be sure and leave that below. Also, I highly encourage you, if you want to see this optimized style of game in action, go over to verbalgameacademy.com. You're going to see me demonstrating this with real girls from start to finish throughout the entire interaction and pointing out exactly what I'm saying, why I'm saying it, what I'm thinking, what my game plan is, all those different things so you can really understand this on a deep, deep level. And you can even steal some of my lines, the ones that are congruent with you, and understand the ideas and formats on a really, really deep level. So head over there, verbalgameacademy.com. I don't know how long I'll leave it up, but it's going to be a pretty incredible video for you to check out.